You. Okay, so welcome everybody for joining this JFM webinar. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Sarah Waters. I'm at the Mathematical Institute at the University of Oxford, and I'm one of the deputy editors of the Journal of Fluid Mechanics. So it's a great pleasure today to welcome the Women in Fluid Dynamics UK Special Interest Group that's led by Dr. Claire Savy to deliver today's JFM webinar. So together they've assembled an excellent lineup of short talks by Claire, but also it's a pleasure to welcome Doctors Draga Pilo-Puzovic, Alan Jolly and Magda Carr. And we're very much looking forward to hearing your talks. And I don't want to take any time away from all the talks. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Claire. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for the really kind introduction. So as Sarah said, my name is Claire Savy. I'm actually currently a centre manager for the Bragg Centre for Materials Research at the University of Leeds. But for the previous 10 years of my career, I've been working either on the CDT in fluid dynamics or the Leeds Institute for Fluid Dynamics at the University of Leeds, hence my connection to fluids. So yeah, I'm going to start off just giving you a bit of an introduction to the Women in Fluids SIG. Trying through my slides. And then once we've kind of gone through the SIG, we'll talk a little bit about some of the key results from the National Women in Fluid survey that we conducted, what our current activities and next steps are. When I say SIG, I mean Special Interest Group, and I'll be using that acronym throughout the talk today. And then we're really pleased to welcome three speakers from across our community in fluid dynamics. So we've got Draga, who will be chatting about unraveling three-dimensional active transport by ciliary rays on coral surfaces. Ellen will introduce ice particle motion near an aircraft surface, and Magda will talk about laboratory generation and visualization of internal solitary waves. So really great range of different research topics. And then we should hopefully, if all goes to time, because we do have to change between people's slides, have a bit of time to do a Q&A at the end as well. So, just a little bit of background about the Special Interest Group and how it came about. So the SIG grew out of distinct activities across the community to support women in fluids. And there's an awareness of it. There is still an underrepresentation of women in the discipline, both in industry and academia. EPSRC reported that underrepresentation of women is a well-established issue in the engineering and physical sciences community, and in their gender diversity reports in 2020 and 22. And that hasn't really changed significantly according to more recent data analysis by EPSRC in 2025. So it's still a bit of a persistent issue. On the picture here on the slide is the LIFD 5th birthday discussion panel that we had on Women in Fluids, which was held in January 2024. And that was really around getting people together to talk about the challenges of engaging and retaining women in the discipline and what some of the potential solutions might be. And really off the back of that, occurred to us at Leeds that this was more than just a Leeds issue, it's a national thing. And perhaps there was more work to do here. So Professor Kath Noakes, who was the Deputy Director of LFD at the time, and myself got together a group of women from different institutions and companies across the UK to just discuss what that might look like. And out of the back of that came the proposal to the UK Fluids Network to establish a SIG in spring 2024. And at the time, questions were rightly asked about how inclusive the SIG would be, and we are indeed open to all who are interested in furthering development of women in the discipline. And there was also some discussion around the focus of the SIG and should it include broader diversity criteria. And our feeling as a community was this would dilute our efforts too much, and a focus was needed. And the schemes and interventions that we might try would naturally be different depending on the group we're trying to draw in. So that's hence why we are kind of focused on women, particularly in this group. So we then set about engaging the community through a national survey to really understand how many women are working in the discipline in the UK, in industry and academia, and what the perceived barriers and solutions to those barriers might be. Once we had these results, we've had a series of meetings online with the community to try and get feedback on what the initial areas of focus should be and what suitable interventions there might be to try. Throughout this, we've also been in consultation with the EPSRC, who kindly shared some of their EDI reports and data as well. And obviously the initial meeting that we had was myself and Kath just getting together people that we knew, which isn't the ideal way to run the SIG. So after that, we put out an open call for SIG committee members. And the committee today consists of 14 of us from higher education institutions and industry across the UK. And I think there's only myself and Amy Morgans from Imperial who are on the initial group where we came up with this idea, who actually on the committee. So it really has broadened out and engaged more of the community outside of that initial group who put together this idea. So over the next few slides, I'll introduce the SIG objectives and we'll discuss the national survey results a little bit more. So this is what we came up with in terms of what the SIG wants to focus on, and that's really focusing on enabling a better pipeline of women coming in the discipline, making sure that there's appropriate support and mentoring for women in fluids, as that's identified as being quite important, really raising the profile of women in the discipline, supporting development progression, and obviously one of probably the most important things for the SIG is having that critical mass of people to really be able to raise issues and highlight best practice across the UK to kind of policymakers and funders and so on. We now have over 150 members signed up to the SIG, and if you aren't a member already, please, you're welcome to do so. There's details of our SIG on the UK Fluids Network website, and how to sign up is on there as well if you want to Google that. So digging in a little bit onto some of the survey results, and there was a huge amount of data that came out of this. So I'm just going to skim the surface a little bit. But these were some of the key barriers and enablers that were identified by people responding to the survey. And I should say this survey was open to men as well. It just varied a little bit in which questions that they were asked. So I would say, obviously, it's fair to say some of these are not unique to women necessarily, but they do obviously provide us with some focus areas. You know, things around short-term contracts, role models, career support and advice, networking, support for writing grant proposals, and challenges securing grant project income, which I think is actually quite interesting because EPSRC found that women are consistently underrepresented as PI applicants across EPSRC's portfolio, and application numbers from women for large grants in particular are quite low, while award rates calculated by number of grants are similar for men and women when they're not calculated using the value of grants. I think that's obviously aligns with people's views and perhaps what they feel they need support on based on this. The other piece of data that's interesting from the survey was that most respondents reported they didn't see that many women in senior roles in the discipline. Overall, about 50% of the people who did the survey thought that their department was about 0 to 20% of women, and 36% of them thought there was 20 to 40% of women in the department. So really not, we're looking at maybe 20 to 40% of women in any fluids department in the university or in a company, which obviously we'd like to change. So how might we go about that? So these are some of the recommendations that came out of that national survey, and that's guided some of our initial work and focus areas. One of which is obviously lobbying for changes and highlighting issues that women face at high levels. One of the first things we did was disseminate this survey results to key stakeholders. So I don't know if you heard of the EDI Hub Plus. This is a national EPSC funded initiative that's aimed at sharing best practice and disseminating that in terms of engaging underrepresented groups in STEM areas. We've also obviously shared this with the EPSRC and the institutions involved in the committee. They disseminated through to their universities that way. We have launched a mentoring scheme. Actually, I'll come on to that in terms of what activities we've got going on. Training sessions for women, specifically in terms of how women might approach things, were highlighted. The research culture, which I think, again, is probably more broadly than a women's issue, but that was picked up. Thinking about senior leaders and their training and being allies to women in the discipline and supporting them in progression. And obviously the STEM pipeline. If you haven't got women in the discipline earlier on in career stages, there's no way you're going to increase the number of women at later career points. So just moving on to some of the current things that we're doing. So we have hosted an in-person meeting and event at the UK Fluids Conference in 2025 in Liverpool. So that was last September. And that was really good. We had a committee meeting, and then we had an event for the people who were attending that conference to discuss career progression, balancing family and career as a woman, working in fluid dynamics. And also Mark Jabal really kindly shared a case study on how he'd approached raising the profile of women working in kind of aerospace engineering. We had about 30 people attend that, which was great. At the moment, we do, as I mentioned, the National Mentoring Scheme is open. We've got 56 people signed up to be a mentor, mentee, or both. This is for industry or academia. So if you haven't signed up for that and you'd like to, please feel free to do so. We are looking at developing best practice guidance to share nationally. Initial conversations at the moment have focused around sharing what has worked well across different institutions and companies of our committee members. And we're now moving towards sourcing funding to run projects to test and evaluate interventions. And this includes a research culture project I've managed to get funding for at the University of Leeds. So that will focus mostly on, well, totally on people at Leeds, but hopefully we'll be able to have applications elsewhere. So that's going to look at supporting the career transitions of women, particularly at the mid-career point. So when I say mid-career, I mean kind of lecturer, senior lecturer roles. So that's just started last month. It's early stages, but we were looking to share the findings of that with the community. Obviously, we're also staying connected with the EPSRC to share our findings with them and get advice from them. And we are all really keen to raise the profile of the SIG by featuring events like this one. So thank you to JFM for hosting us for this. So in terms of upcoming events and activities that we've got, and I've got another slide later on, which you can scan the QR code for it, but we have a diversity symposium, which is being led by one of our committee members, Esther Garcia-Tunon, on the 11th of September at Liverpool. The EDI Hub Plus has a funding call that's open now. We are investigating having a look at that and seeing whether we could apply to that to either test new intervention or scale up an existing intervention that would support the retention and or progression of women in fluids. And if you haven't already followed us on LinkedIn, again, I've got a slide later on for that, but please do follow us. We're doing a spotlight series at the moment to try and raise the profile of women in fluids in the UK, which is ongoing. And that's open to anyone. If you'd like to be featured, then please do get in touch. That would be brilliant. The more people we can showcase, the better. I've whizzed through these slides, but just to say thank you so much to the SIG committee, that these are the SIG committee members, aside from myself, who've been involved in supporting the SIG and steering its activities and coming up with what that strategy might look like. So it's really great to have like a broad cross-section of the fluids community involved. As you can see, it's across the whole of the UK. We've got industry representation as well. Just to share here, this is the RU Town Diversity Symposium I mentioned previously. So this is going to talk about kind of women in fluids, role models, resilience and research paths, and will feature different speakers, national and international. So really worth checking out if you're able to get across Liverpool. If you want to scan the QR code, and more information will follow. And just to say thank you so much for listening. I know it was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of the things that we're doing in the SIG and how we set up and what our aims are. But if you have any questions or you'd like to follow up, that's my email address on the slide there. You can also join us on LinkedIn. The QR code there will take you straight to our LinkedIn page if you'd like to join that. I don't want to take too much time away from the following three speakers because I think they are probably the highlights of this show. So what I'm going to do now is we'll do questions at the end. So if you've got anything for me, please write that down and come back to me. So I'm going to hand over next to Draga, who's going to talk about unraveling the three-dimensional active transport by ciliary arrays on coral surfaces. Gosh, it's a tongue twister.